Hey everyone, and welcome to the finalist voting for the Maven Rail Challenge. Today we'll be taking a look at the 5 projects up for the main prize, and we'll be evaluating them based on the challenge objective, which was to create an exploratory dashboard to analyze traveler behavior and operating performance. And we'll be judging each project as a whole, including its description, images, and embedded reports. So let's get started.
All right, so kicking things off here, I get the privilege of talking through Kristen's submission here. So kind of thinking about the challenge prompt, we've got exploratory dashboard, check, that's covered. Identify the most popular routes, got that here on the overview tab, so check there. Determine peak travel times, we've got that checked off on our peak times and routes tab. Diagnose on-time performance and contributing factors. We can see all of that from the performance tab here. And then finally, analyze revenue from different ticket types and classes. Check there as well. And you can see all of this within the revenue tab. So just off the bat, Kristen does an amazing job here. I think using color, a really clean layout. It's an intuitive layout as well, where I'm not kind of like hunting or having to search around for different, features or aspects. Again, it's all very digestible and understandable. One of the small things that I actually really liked when I first saw this report is the filter pane in the page navigation being on the right-hand side here. I either tend to do this myself or see a lot of other folks doing it, is naturally kind of putting it on the left. And I actually kind of like it over here on the right. I tend to scroll on the right-hand side of the page. So my cursor ends up being over here. So from like a user standpoint, that was actually kind of, a nice thing to be able to just interact with the tabs here. So looking at the overview tab, one of the things that I really liked about this is when people design their visuals and title their visuals using natural questions. So which route had the highest sales versus something like route with highest sales. It's a small kind of tweak to the way you're titling charts and stuff, but I really like how it ends up making the dashboard feel and the readability of it. So big props there. One of the other pieces that I really liked was how insights were incorporated. And then anytime there was a case where we needed to look into something a little bit deeper to investigate, like this significant dip at the start of a couple of months for the passenger volume by day trends here. So really liked how the insights were incorporated here as well and kind of called out. I thought that was natural and easy to understand. But that said, there was a couple of things that you could potentially be critical about. On the first overview tab here, we're talking about top 10 revenue generators. It's a lot more than top 10 on this visual. Again, easy to update that stuff, just setting a filter, something like that. And we only actually have 5 here. So again, little update there goes a long way. We do talk a lot about truncated axes, and there's a couple of visuals here where we don't start at 0. And I actually think that that's okay. And the reason why I think it's okay is because it's important to see the fluctuation and the daily passenger trends in this visual because they're so consistent day to day. If we had kind of zoomed out to have the axis start at 0, you'd potentially lose some of the insight into the daily fluctuations there. The other example is on the performance tab, the on-time percentage. Same use case here. We're very high percentage, the rates of on-time trip performance. So again, if we were zoomed all the way out, starting at 0, you would miss a lot of this detail here. So again, I think these are good use cases where, as a best practice, making sure that your axes aren't truncated. Again, that's a best practice. But when you're really trying to understand some of the detail, when the performance doesn't change much or fluctuate much, I think it's okay in these types of cases. But one thing that I did want to call out here is this donut chart on the top right. I was a little confused when I first looked at it because we basically have 2 segments. We're looking at rail card holders and then non-rail card holders or the other segment. But what was confusing to me at first was that the rail card holders are divided into sub segments. And so I didn't quite understand what that was. Fortunately, there is a tooltip, so you can see that there's a subcategory here for adult, disabled, and senior. So one suggestion here is if your primary goal is to really show the overall proportion of revenue from card holders versus non-card holders, adding in subcategory in this way, I think it just complicates the visual, especially because the coloring is all the same. So what I'd recommend is removing that subcategory and then adding another chart, like a bar chart or something like that, if you do want to call out that subcategory detail within card holders versus others. So small tweak there. I think that updates this visual a lot, makes it a lot cleaner. There's probably some other ways that you could evolve that as well. But yeah, Kristen, overall, really loved the submission. Great job.
I was just thinking about that, the chart that Aaron just explained, and I love the idea. And one other option that came to mind is that, like, instead of a whole different chart, if they wanted to call out those subcategories, maybe there is a small info button there that says hover over and then use a tooltip to further break down those subcategories. I see that there is a lot of sort of text-based fields in that report. So she's explaining a lot of what's happening in these visuals and concluding. All props for that. Could take the same approach with this particular visual. Otherwise, really like the use of color. There was one green somewhere that I thought like really maybe jumped out of everything a little bit, but otherwise I really like these earthy. That's the one exactly. Otherwise, I really like these earthy colors. They're easy to read, very easy on the eyes, don't tire the user a lot, so love it.
Yeah, Bronislav, I had the same kind of reaction to the text that was there. And Aaron, you mentioned this right off the beginning, that framing some of these visuals with a question or with a really clear statement, I think helped. I envisioned that a new user to this could navigate pretty easily and understand what was happening with those additions. And that's sometimes a really hard balance to strike when you're going for an exploratory dashboard. But I think Kristen did a really great job here of adding just that little bit of explanatory element that really ties back to those objectives in the prompt, that makes it easy for the user to understand this is where you want to look for that information. So great call out there.
The other thing I noticed that I liked about this one, I think it's in the overview tab, Aaron, where the first question, which was to identify the most popular routes, you'll see on the right, like the most frequent answer, which is correct, like the 10 best selling or the most tickets purchased was from Manchester Piccadilly to Liverpool Lime Street. But I love that Kristen also included the top 10 revenue generators, because in that one, like London to King's Cross, Liverpool Lime Street to London Euston, I think you can't even see on the top 5 that, Manchester Piccadilly to Liverpool Lime Street, right? Which is, those two are very close to each other, those two cities. So it is great to have that additional insight of like, yeah, maybe these don't sell as many tickets, but we're making a lot more money off of these other routes, especially that London to York one, which is really interesting.
Okay, so Irina, it's been a while since I've enjoyed watching a report in one of these sessions. Fortunately, Irina mentioned somewhere in her explanation that she wasn't able to sort of embed this thing live, which is really, really too bad, because I think we enjoyed even more. But she came prepared. I, of course, as always, invite everybody to read through this. There's quite a lot in terms of volume, but we do get some helper images, which we are going to use in this particular case. And so 3 things stood out to me in this report: the consistency of the layout, the approach with the Pareto principle, and lack of filters. So off the top, like, she uses very clear top-down sort of layout, which you will see in a minute holds true for the better part of this report. We have these sort of tabs at the top, which basically answer the challenge prompt. And then I love these cards. Take a look at these cards, right? So she opted to sort of filter to top 5, top 10. Basically, she offers the user here the option. This maxes out at top 10, but it's easily fixable in case that user can or wants to sort of add a higher number there. But take a look at these cards, right? So we are at top 5. And now we see we have selected 5 routes out of 65 total, which account for 12,000 passengers out of total, trips out of total 20,000, which is good for 61%. And then we read that we have 20,000 passengers in those top 5 out of 32 grand, which accounts for 64, and so on and so on. And all of that information, right, is packed. You can just read this one line left to right, and you know a lot about what's happening in this company, right? And then there is this awesome matrix, which is very clear, very simple. But look at how this conditional formatting is smart, right? It's like sorted properly. And then you can immediately see that there is a huge disbalance here, which then you can take a look at what it is. You can see which route it is. You can see the pricing, the average journey length, and understand why is it that 12% of passengers drive 26% of revenue. So really easy to use. And like cherry at top, if you click on any one of these, the map highlights, right? So if I were to, for example, click on Manchester, Piccadilly, Liverpool, Lime, there is this red line on the map. Really cool stuff. And now keep this image in mind. I'm going to move on to the next one. check it out. So it's the same layout, right? We have those tabs, and then we have that, again, matrix at the bottom. And over here, she analyzes the revenue. Again, very similar cards, right? So there is very little effort to read through this stuff. It's all the same. It's all in the same place. It's just things that are updating and super smart color coding. For example, in this sort of page, we have 4 submenus. And if I were to click through these, each one of these quadrants here would light up, and they're all different color. And all of these charts afterwards are the same color as their representative quadrant. So let me exit out of here. You can see it better a little bit here. Right, so take a look at this. So I'm clicking at the revenue breakdown, top and selected routes, and then everything is orange. And then I see right one next to each other, all kinds of sort of slices and dices of this data that I could possibly want. And then I move to the refunds breakdown, and then everything is gray. And again, I get those same slices, and super easy to navigate, super easy to read, and 0 filters at this point, right? So she uses native Power BI cross-filtering capability, and she calls it out in her About section that this was very deliberate, right? So she was afraid to overwhelm the user. We saw a lot of these filter panes, right? So people would build separate pages, and then you have to set up a bunch of filters, and then the data would be returned to you. But she took a little bit of a different approach, and I think it's all the better for it, because there is a lot that you can slice and dice with this data. And so why not do it right then and there? Let me go back to those images. Again, so we are now on a on-time performance tab. Again, we have those cards which follow the similar Pareto principle. So right now we are selected at top 9, which account for 77% of all trips canceled, 78% of trips delayed, and so on. Here below, I really like this sort of bar chart. Usually what happened, people would break this analysis completely into 2 different sections. I love that she has her reasons listed out here, and then on the right we just see the cancellations and the delays and how they correspond to each one of the reasons, really minimizing the space that is necessary, again, to communicate a lot of information. On the right hand side, it's that same information trended over time, and again, we have that same sort of matrix. And again, you can see how clever this conditional formatting is, where it just screams at you. These bars are just jumping out at you, calling out attention to these routes. And then you can start digging into why 61% of all of this was impacted by either a delay or a cancellation. Again, if I click on anything here, the map will light up and signal which route I'm looking at. And I think I have 2 more of these. So the travel times, this is where the layout sort of breaks a little bit. My recommendation is always for folks to not use numbers or values in heat maps. Granted, there are use cases, but if we are looking at number of passengers, by the way, we have the ability to slice this heat map, but by all of these sort of measures here. And if we are looking at these trends, I don't really see the need to include the numbers. We're not going to be looking at those anyway. We're trying to understand the patterns, the repetitions that happen. So probably this would be the weakest link of the report, far from it being a bad one, but I was just amazed with the rest of the stuff and didn't have anything bad to say about it. Finally, there is an inclusive sort of matrix that just gives you all the detail at the lowest possible granularity. In case that anybody wants to scroll and browse through this stuff, there are some filtering options here, but again, some very, very, very clever sort of conditional formatting. Again, it's been a long while since I enjoyed looking at something like this, and I don't know what's the reason that she wasn't able to embed this. If it's a sort of lack of Power BI account, please reach out to us. You can get the Power BI trial via Maven completely for free, and you can embed this stuff live so everybody can enjoy it. Really good stuff, Irina.
One thing I'll add is I really like the maps in the visualization. Oftentimes I find people will include a map just because it's pretty and it doesn't really add too much to the dashboard. But in this case, I think the routes are so clear, and that was a really effective use of maps.
Yeah, that I don't like maps. I think everybody by this point knows that I'm always ranting against them. But yeah, to your point, it doesn't take a lot of space, and there is actual value and function in this map. Probably because it's not a world map. Folks tend to include the maps of the entire world for whatever reason, which is really useless. But again, and one other thing that I have to call out about this sort of entries. Like, it's not a competition in how many different chart types can I include in something. There's maybe 3 different charts in these 4 pages, and it still allows actually so much exploration, and it's so easy to use.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked is these matrices really pack in a lot of detail, right? And a lot of data. I'm kind of looking at the one on the revenue page right now, where the use of color to highlight, the refunded amounts or number of or percentage of refunds, right? And then using the data bars for the total revenue and total passengers to really draw attention to those big values. You can clearly see that it's 26%, it's the most, but like having those data bars, right, to kind of call attention to that, I think it helps take a visual that contains a lot of data and makes it that much more digestible. So that's good use of those tools in that visual.
Yeah, the thing that I love about this one is that it's, to your point, Branislav, I think the use of tables, but the use of data bars in tables or heat maps in tables lets you interact, because here, like, yeah, maybe I want to, sort. Right now it's by, I think it looks like it's revenue after refunds, but you can, if you wanted to look at percentage, you can very easily click on that column and it'll sort by that. So it allows you to interact with it and explore the dashboard without it just being, because I think a lot of people a lot of times you say, oh, exploratory dashboard. And it's just feels like an incentive to just add filters and have people break it down. But I think this way allows you to explore it a lot more organically. And the top end use, it's not just filtering the rest of the dashboard, it's highlighting, using that Pareto, style like you're mentioning, Vladislav, to call out like, all right, the top end represents this of the whole across all of these different metrics. And I just think that's a much smarter way of doing it. And the other thing that I thought was very clever is in using those filters. I think it was in the travel times one or on time performance. Here, let me see. It was
this one?
No, one before that, probably. I think it's that one. I remember for this one, I thought, oh, well, it's right now it's sorted by number of trips canceled, but Manchester Piccadilly delivers to Wine Street. As we know, it just has a lot of number of trips scheduled. I wonder if like by percentage of trips, like how that looks. And it like the filter is right there, right? It goes from you can right now it's by number of trips it's impacted, it's selected,
it's this one here.
But you can click. So I just think like that use of interactivity is very clever in just like looking at the differences versus just like, here filtering it by departure or by arrival station or something like that, or by month of the year. Because especially since as you start to play around with this dashboard, you tend to notice that there's really not a lot of seasonality present, even if you like look at it across weekdays. So I thought this was very clever. I wish they had, to your point, Branislav, embedded it just so that like we're not just imagining all this. But I do think that this is a great way of showing how you built an exploratory dashboard without actually letting people explore it. I think it was a very clever use of the about this project description.
So I've got some really great stuff here to review and learn from our next finalist, Aanor. Now, starting off, we have a pretty familiar structure here that we've seen with some of our other finalists, where we have a summary page and then we have individual pages that are going to take us through and give us some more detailed information about each of the questions that were covered in the brief. And there's a lot of detail in here that can answer very specific questions. But I want to use the most of my time today to do a walkthrough of how much information Aanor has been able to pack just into this single page as a summary. So one of the first decisions I really appreciated here was the use of these high-level metrics right along the left-hand side, because they give me that at-a-glance indication of whether or not there's a situation going on in any of these key areas that might require my additional attention or action or drilling into some of those other pages. And I wanted to call out a design choice here. The use of these indicator triangles in combination with their color to provide context for each of these KPIs. So the way we see it right now, all these triangles are green, but I want to draw your attention in particular to these ones down here where we have percent canceled and percent delayed. And you may notice that unlike the arrows for passenger revenue and on time that are pointing up, these ones are green and they're pointing down. And the reason this is happening is in order to have improvement in our overall percent on time, we actually need to see less cancellations and less delays. So this is a very savvy way to indicate something that's actually sometimes really hard to communicate. And that is a scenario where the lower value is what's preferred. So a great job here, Aanor, in using that combo of color and direction to tell us how these lower values are important. And just to show that it does update, it flips and you get those arrows going the other direction when we have the red in there. Now, the next element that I really appreciated on this page was the decision to give information about the popularity for each route in the form of this matrix here. And what we can see is there was a decision to include two parameters, revenue as well as the number of passengers. And what I like about this is it addresses a question that I think comes up quite often about how do we define popularity. And Enrique, I think you mentioned this when we were talking about Kristen's project, that in order to decide which one is the most important, you have to eliminate the other. So I really like that Aanor decided here to include both of them so that the user has the choice to be able to sort or filter and think about the way that they want to answer the question. And then the last thing I wanted to call out on this summary page was the incredible use of tooltips. You know, one of the hardest things we do in designing a dashboard is trying to decide what stays on the page and what we can leave out. And Aanor has used the tooltips here to kind of give us a little bit of a compromise of that information without having to go into those subsequent pages. So overall, when we're looking at it, we have an incredibly clean aesthetic with curated information that's going to give us answers to those key questions. But if I go ahead and I hover over any of the visuals, I get this pop-up that's giving me either more granularity or additional information that wasn't included. So I love that this is both interactive and, as Aanor has called out in the top here, I can hover and discover. I just love that phrasing. It makes me want to go in and explore even more. Now, the last one I want to draw your attention to is this tooltip here. I really like this one because there is an interesting addition here that I don't think I saw on the other submissions, and that is the number or the frequency of weekly trains. And when I saw this number, it got me to start thinking about, well, how many passengers are coming with those number of trains per week? And it reminded me that if you have this information, you might spark your reviewer to start looking at what other calculations might be interesting, because I started to think about average passengers per train. And so I loved that your tooltip had me thinking about and investigating and potentially drawing action based on how congested is each train. So overall, just a really great dashboard, and even more information is there on your subsequent pages, but it's been a pleasure just to give a high-level walkthrough of your summary.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here that I really liked. And one of them was, again, just kind of that use of color, to be able to call attention to. So up top on the by time or the departure time slot, right? Using the mix of the blue and the gray there to say like, hey, here are our peak times in blue, and kind of really getting that to pop and stand out. And then the use of color for the ticket class, again, you would call out like the tooltips and the use there, but again, just very easy and intuitive to, hover over those values. They're color coded, they seem important. You hover over, you get that tooltip where it's breaking it down by standard and first class there. So, really liked that stuff as well. One of the pieces that I still like, it irks me a little bit, is the up and down arrows, like the green and the red arrows. Like I think there's an opportunity here to provide a little bit more context to those arrows, right? I love the fact that in the about this project section that it's being defined, or that it's being specifically called out how they're defined. It's the slope of the line, right? And whether that's trending up or down, but it still is like, when you're looking at the whole date range, like you're missing that context, right? So it's like, hey, compared to last week or compared to last month, right? When you're looking at the whole range of the date set, it's just a general trend and it doesn't really mean much. So I think that there's a great opportunity here to keep this in here, but add some additional context for a time period comparison. It's going to make it that much more impactful to understand how revenue and passenger volume and percent of on-time fares and stuff is performing when you have that other kind of date or time context in there.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Erin. And I had noted down that I would like to see something about a little bit more of a definition on that. I think I missed that it was by slope because I wanted to know what the benchmark was in there. So a great call out there. And I think having it right on the dashboard would absolutely help the viewer kind of understand what does the improvement mean. So great call out.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think I was just gonna say, even just changing the icon, like I know right now they're arrows, but if I know there's like the classic trend, like a little line that kind of is going up, and like just showing that it's a trend line that's greener, like in the direction and then the color. Or I was wondering if there was a tooltip for the actual like KPI number that showed the actual trend with the trend line, and maybe you can conditionally format the trend line to kind of give an indication. Granted, you should probably just call it out in some sort of text. But I was wondering that myself. I'm glad, Aaron, you did a little bit of research underneath to see what that was coming from.
I was struggling a little bit at first with the column chart in the on time, sort of the bottom section of that dashboard. It's like very easy update, just some light wordsmithing. Like when you read reason for delay and then you see all of those reasons, but then there are two columns, it's not immediately obvious what's the second column. It is color coded, right? So there is sort of, let's call these red and yellow because I don't know more than 5 colors. So there is some color coding that clarifies what's what, but then the title of the chart is misleading because it's not just the delay. It takes a little bit of looking into it. Again, very light update, but I do love the huge KPIs. I have to say that they're simple and yet very effective. Like it takes 3 seconds to understand what's what with those numbers. And you have to appreciate, again, it's very smart conditional formatting on the matrix. There is that London King Cross York line, which drives like obscene amount of revenue, whereas it's maybe third overall by the number of passengers. And these kinds of things are very easily noticeable when you have. Imagine if those bars weren't there, like who would understand those numbers so easily?
Final thing I'll say about this one, Stacey, I love that you didn't go into any other tabs. I know in all of these we've said, all right, like they broke it out, like each question into a different tab. But honestly, and when the challenge was framed and we launched it, like I was hoping for a single page dashboard that explored these elements because they're really not that complex. Granted, if you want to drill into all the detail possible, you can build as many pages as you want. But the fact that this single one-page summary like concisely answers like all the questions in the prompt, and it even adds more detail with like the tooltips, not even just having to go to the next pages. It's like it's honestly exactly what I was looking for, and I'm glad it's like really well showcased here.
Yeah, I thought that was a standout feature too, Enrique. So I'm glad I focused on that part too.
I really love this entry from Aishwarya. The first thing that stood out to me was just the overall design. So if we go down here, you can see here's the dashboard. And one thing that I always call out is just the feel, because that's your initial impression, right? So for this one, there's a soothing color palette, and I feel really calm when I'm interacting with the dashboard. And I think that's really important for a manager because as a manager, you have a lot of numbers that you have to look into. So if you come into this and you're calm, that's a great state to be in as you're exploring. Another thing I really liked about this design is just how interactive it is and how exploring is encouraged. So one thing that I found over the years creating data visualizations is that some people like to be told what the insight is, and other people like to discover the insights on their own. And the great thing about this dashboard is it does both. So when you go through this, you can see with every visualization, you can discover the insight on your own, but then there's this nice insight underneath too, if you want to be told that insight. So I would say that is kind of like the emotional aspect. I would say this has a great color palette and design, and I feel like I'm ready to explore. In terms of the technical aspect, I'll just go through a few of the visualizations that really stood out to me. One on this first page is just this heat map. It's really gorgeous. It tells me the story right away that these are some peak hours. And I think what's also really cool is like this is the overall heat map, and then you can toggle between AM and PM, and then this drills down even further. So you see these are the busiest time slots within certain peak hours. And so I thought that was a really cool visual. If we go to the second page here, I would say this page, it does a really good job of starting at the top left, giving you that high level overview and then drilling down further as you go to the bottom right. So this is the overall monthly trend. It has that question format that we've been talking about that's really approachable in these visualizations. And then you just get more and more detail as you go to the bottom right. In terms of this third tab, I think one of the things that's done really well here are just some of these callouts. And you see all these callouts here that are really easy to see. And again, there's this toggle that I love. You have these canceled and then delayed, and then everything updates and you get this delayed rate. And I would say, I think like we talked about putting all this information on one page versus multiple pages. Personally, I think that because this is an exploratory dashboard, like if I was a manager and I wanted information, like a ton of information, this is great for that because there's so much information captured here. And then with some of the toggles, you're able to flip between that information. So it's not overwhelming. And then finally, for this route analysis page, again, this, I think some of you called it a matrix. I think of it as just like data. It's not strictly a visualization, but I love this for exploratory dashboards so much. I know when I was working and people would create a lot of visualizations, I'd be like, but I want to know all the details. And I feel like this does that so well. And it's just really easy to see with this light highlighting. So it's like the route from London, percent canceled. Okay, 11%, that stands out. That's London Paddington to Oxford. Like that's so easy to explore. So in summary, I love the design. I love how technical this is, and you can do all the toggling and you can explore it really easily. My one piece of feedback would be on this AM PM split, because here you see it goes to 11 a.m. and then it splits for 12 p.m., which feels like an unusual cutoff for me. Like I know the data says AM PM, but I think there's this really clear split here at 6 a.m. all the way here to 6 p.m. And I think that might have been a better way to split the data. But overall, I thought this was an excellent entry and curious to hear what you all think about it as well.
Yeah, for me personally, in terms of design, easily, if not the best, then one of top 2 or 3. I also spent a lot of time looking at this and it's just so clear. I love the line chart, but overall, like who would have thought that there's 2 or 3 colors on this, and yet it's never boring, right? It's to this point, it's just inviting you to explore more. And I absolutely love the huge matrix or a table, whichever one it is. I think it's a matrix though, especially now. That's Power BI, if I'm not too much mistaken. Now they made an update, so you basically have pivot tables in Power BI now as well. And so, yeah, I love those callouts and the fact that you can just so easily navigate. A lot of folks didn't do this. I was expecting more of this most popular list, basically top-bottom sort of slices. I actually didn't see a lot of that, especially not with the finalists. Great ad, though.
And Alice, to your point, like on this same page, the route analysis page, with having the ability to just look at this single page by AM peak and off peak, like there's so much insight and kind of like, drilling around and looking into things that you can do. Like there's probably no shortage of insights and like potential route optimization stuff. And like, hey, what if we, offered a discount at this time because we're seeing like high rider volume or, whatever. But, this, to your point about like wanting all the data kind of right there to be able to dig into and explore, I think there's a great view that helps with that, with some very basic filtering options at the top.
Yeah, and one of the standout measures that I saw that was added here, and I don't think it was on the others, is actually on the railway performance slide, Alice. On this one, there's an inclusion here of the number of passengers affected by the cancellation or the delay. And it made me think of another challenge we had where it was like outages, and you can have the count, but then when you start to think about the impact of the number of passengers, that just adds another layer of consideration so that you can really assess who or how many people are being impacted. So I really liked that addition here as well.
Right. So last but certainly not least, we've got Gerard's entry here. And I'll start with his project description because I think he follows this same recipe in most, if not all, of his entries. And I think, if there's anyone to learn from these, it's from Gerard. And what he always does really well is just outline his approach, right? Like he read the project, prompt or challenge prompt, which he outlines here. He has the data. So how is he going to approach this challenge, right? And here he was very clear. He wants the end user to go from a high level analysis and then drill it down to a more granular level. And he's going to divide the report into 4 pages. Again, we've seen this from other finalists to align with the 4 bullet points that you can see here as part of the challenge prompt. Now, from there, he goes into his data prep process. And the two things that I love the most, which is really just the one thing, is that he categorized the stations into regions. I didn't see anyone else do that. Maybe it's because he's from Ireland himself, so he's a little bit more familiar with them. And then from stations to cities, which we did see more people. We just saw that in the previous entry. I know, Alice, we had, London and then the actual different stations for each route. But there's one particular insight when you actually grouped into cities that I saw here that, you couldn't see in the others because they didn't do that grouping. So I love doing that. And then from there, the other best practice that I think you can see here is that at the end of each one of his pages, and he's got, 1, 2, 3, 4 that he mentions, he's got this list of additional items that he would have added to the dashboard if he'd had more time. And the reason I think this is the best practice is because exploratory dashboards that, go out into production like these will always be evolving and changing and improving over time. So already having next steps, like immediate next steps in mind as you push this out, I think is a great thing to always be thinking about. Even if right now it means, this is the way I'm pushing it. This is my MVP right now. And then let's see where we go from there. So I'm actually going to take that same approach to kind of critiquing this entry. I'm going to call out what he's doing, what I liked, and the next steps that I personally feel that could maybe help improve it. So if we go to the dashboard, you'll see that he's got this landing page here, and we can go into each one of his pages. The first one is, again, to answer the first question, which is what is the most popular route? You'll see most of them apart from London. Next from there, these are the regions that I was talking about. It's from the north. And if you click on it, you'll see that really means either Manchester or Liverpool. You'll see that those are the two northern departure stations. And then here we've got the station route for the top 10 journeys. Again, the fan favorite Manchester Piccadilly, Liverpool Line Street. But if we go over here, you'll see that London to Birmingham is actually far more popular than Manchester to Liverpool, almost twice as popular. The only difference is that there are 2 departure stations in London. We've got Euston and St. Pancras that go to Birmingham New Street. And it's not really that much of a difference to look at these, as separate because they're both based in London. And once you do combine them, you can see that that's actually the most, technically not route, but city to city, departure to arrival, connection. So I thought that was very interesting. The other thing you'll notice as you look at this is that kind of seems like we're looking at 2 identical, lists of the same charts, and we kind of are. Both of these are driven by the top end filter, so we can move that to 8 or 7, and you'll see that they're both filtered. They're both driven by the weekly range, but then these filters here will actually change this one. And the idea, let's maybe change this to weekday and, AM peak. This will change this. So you kind of you're able to compare the filtered to the unfiltered views. And while I appreciate the intention behind that, I don't feel it's that easy to make the comparison between this side and this side of the dashboard page. What you could do, especially considering Power BI's 2 types of filters, you could use these 2 to filter the visuals, and maybe these over here to highlight the visual. So you still have the full scope, but it'll just highlight what these represent. And that way you kind of still get the filtered to whole comparison without having to essentially duplicate each view and kind of have to go back and forth. Granted, maybe I'm saying it and it makes sense in my head, and once you put that out, it doesn't pay off. But that was just a thought that I had to maybe remove this duplicate view because I wasn't having such an easy time comparing what we're seeing right now, which is the intention behind it. If we go on to the next page, you'll see that again, before we had region to city to route, again, we're doing, to his point, high level with drill down. We've got the most popular 3-hour blocks in a day for departures. Then it's broken down by day of week and hour of day. And then it's broken down by hour of day and by route. So again, he's taking that same approach consistently throughout each of the pages, and we have the same filters. If we go to the next one, and Branislav, you'll appreciate these. I'll go back. The heat maps without any numbers in them, very clean, very consistent. From there, again, we're looking at ticket types and class. It's broken down high level, first class here, standard class here. We've got these high level APIs. Then we break it down by ticket types as well, and then by ticket type and departing city. So again, top to bottom view, very consistent. I do think it's a little bit too many KPIs here to properly compare, especially between the first class and standard. But I get what he was going for. And if you just take the time to consume it, I think it works very well. And finally, let's skip one at some point. I think I skipped this time performance here. So this is talking about the delays and cancellations. Gerard is strictly going to focus on the delays here, not on the cancellation. And from there, again, top level view, 86% on time, 7.2 are delayed. From there, he kind of looks at this in 3 different metrics. So number of delayed journeys, average delay, and refunded ticket revenue because of those delays. One level deeper breaks it down by reason, and he sorts them the same way consistently. So they're sorted top to bottom by delayed journeys, but then we still have the same order of the reasons for the rest of these for consistency. And I think that really helps. What I do think, though, is because you already have the order to kind of intuitively know which one is which, you don't need to do the color coding for each one, because I think that just makes, especially this part where he prints it out by week, a little bit too confusing. I'm not confusing, but too crowded or busy for my taste. So I think a normal heat map like he used, let's see if I can find it now again. A normal heat map like this one here, right? A normal heat map here, instead of these bubbles with the numbers and the different colors for each rows, would have been a little bit easier to interpret. But again, a very minor change, and the insights are still there. So overall, I think another great entry by Gerard, and again, one in which he clearly outlines his approach and then follows it, which is great to see. I do think it takes a little bit too much time to consume the entire thing. I guess I already kind of showed a little bit of a preference for a one-page approach to this, but I will say it is because each page has so much detail that he's trying to drill into as you go through. So not to knock it by any means, I still think this was an amazing entry by Gerard, one that was apparently difficult for me to navigate.
So slightly off topic here, if you click the 4 of 5 in the bottom center, don't click the next page, but click 4 or 5. No, like the middle text where it says 4 or 5, it brings up a page navigation menu.
I did not know that. And honestly, all the other times that I was navigating it, I was using these arrows here, but I wanted to do it the way he intended it to.
Yeah.
But it was just driving me crazy right now.
Yeah. And it could potentially be a good use case for, I know that doesn't take up a lot of space there, but like if you are publishing reports in this way, you could use the navigation tools within the UI versus having to create your own navigation path. But again, points off. No, just joking. Yeah. So again, like I think this is I think you're exactly right, Enrique, where it's like, I think we're seeing like, this is a very Gerard submission, right? There's a lot of really great stuff here. He even calls it out himself in the About This Project section where, limited time to put this together. Here's what I would do differently. And again, like I really like the flow of the report. One of the pages that I specifically really like is that peak travels time, page 3. But again, it's visually so easy to consume this, and there's so much data here, but like intuitively you understand it, and it's very easy to go left to right, top to bottom, and really just kind of understand what's going on here. So I think overall, this was one of my favorite pages within the whole report.
I was going to add a bit on that. Like for all these challenges, there's usually one visualization that I just love. And I agree. It's this page. I just feel like the heat map on the bottom, it just tells a great story. And just like the tiniest things, like all the padding is like the perfect size. And it's just it feels so good to consume it. So that's all I wanted to add. Go ahead, Brian.
I was also going to continue on that simplicity of this particular page. And if you read through the text in the walkthrough, Gerard is actually somewhat scientific about his peak times, right? So for everybody else, like they would probably plot some sort of a heat map or a line chart or a bar chart, something that shows us those peaks, right? But Gerard actually defines, there's a mathematical formula there. I think it's like if a certain 3-hour period contains more than 15% of all the travel for that day, then it's a peak, right? And then if you go on the weekend, you're going to discover that it's not just the usual afternoon peak. I think there are actually 3 peak periods in one. I think there is an option somewhere there to filter for the weekends, right? And so you can see that now peak is actually somewhat larger than you would expect or have seen in a lot of these other entries. So novel approach there, really good stuff.
And that's all the finalists. So I know we've talked a lot about these, but let's bring it all home and let's think, who do we think put together, the best exploratory dashboard that helps analyze, travel behavior and operating performance? And I'll open up the floor.
I have to support Irina again. I'm sorry. It's just I really liked the overall execution of that work, of that entry, and the fact that it's not even live or interactive, and it's still I must have seen those images 100 times just today. I was just blown away. That said, Gerard, as usual, has done a lot. I was slightly overwhelmed, I have to say, with some of his visual choices, but his execution is almost flawless, and always a pleasure to walk through his dashboards.
I'd say my 2 favorites. I love Irina's as well. I love the route maps. That's one thing we didn't see from the other finalists. But I also loved Aishwarya's. I just felt like the design was so great. She included all the information and it really was that exploratory dashboard. That's what we asked for. And then it just made you want to explore.
I think that's kind of where I'm landing too, is Irina and Aishwarya's. Like they're both of very similar to me with like the way that they're set up and built and the visuals, and then how exploratory they both are. The more I kind of bounce back and forth between both of their project submissions, I think they're both my favorites, or becoming my favorites out of this group.
Yeah, I would align with that too, Aaron. I was going to make sure that I put in a bid to see Aishwarya's at the finalist voting. And Alice, I really like how you had said like it's a calming effect, because there's a lot of information packed on here. And so having that balance of design and the information really kind of talked me through how I might use this and not get overwhelmed by it. So I would definitely want to see this one in the final for voting.
All right, so it looks like we've got two contenders here. We'll vote on them, but I want to give a shout out to Aanor. I think, Stacey, I love what you mentioned about that one. And it can be easy to create a dashboard that you can explore a lot of elements on, add a lot of elements to the dashboard. But I think what they achieved was like the ability to let you explore a bunch of stuff while still having like a very concise report. And I will say on the route mapping, they did have that on the tooltips where you hovered over the route, it would render the map just with that route on there, which I think was another really clever way of doing that. Wanted to put that out there. But all right, so it looked like we've got Irina, got Aishwarya. Let's just do Irina 1, Aishwarya 2. Let's see who wins. If everyone's got their vote ready, we can go ahead and do that. All right, 1, 2, 3. Looks like Aishwarya takes it, right? Yeah, 3-2. All right, let's give them a round of applause. Congratulations. That means you've just won our Maven Rail Challenge. As a prize, we're going to be taking home a free annual membership to Maven Analytics and a custom Maven Analytics Challenge winner t-shirt. So congratulations once again. Yeah, that's it for this challenge. Thanks again for anyone that continues to participate. And we hope to see you in the next one. Congratulations, Aishwarya. Really, really great entry to beat out a lot of really, really amazing entries as well. Great work.